Okay, we're going to start programming with Pynguin, and I'm using Pynguin version 0.16, available at pynguin.googlecode.com. Previously we were talking about loops. For instance, we were doing things like forward 200, left 90, and then by running this code repeatedly, we were getting interesting effects by just looping over the code. And that's interesting, but then what we did is we started using variables instead of numbers. So we changed this to side, and then down here we could change this value of side, maybe start up with 100, and then by running our code we could get squares of different size. So now with side being 100, we get a square that's the side of 100, and then we could change this, let's say side equals 50, and then run this, and then get 50 sized squares. And the reason that we did that is so that then we could come through and we could change this, because it's a variable. We could say side plus equals 10, and then each time we run it, the size of the side of the square starts getting larger and larger, and we're getting these square spirals going here. And that's interesting for testing, or if you're trying something new out. But really what we want to do is we want to have Python control the loops and keep track of how long these things are getting and when we want to start and when we want to stop. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce some loops into Python. So the first kind of loop that we're going to introduce is called a while loop. What we're going to do is, right up here at the top of this code, we're going to start with the keyword while, and then after while is going to come a test. The test that we're going to use here is side less than 220, let's say. So this is the test, and the way that a test works is it has to be something that's either true or false. And that's going to depend, in this particular case, is going to depend on what the value of side is. And then all the lines that we want to be repeated in this loop are going to be indented. The way that I'm indenting this here is I'm selecting the lines that I want to indent, and then I'm hitting the tab key. You can use tab to increase the indent, or you can use shift tab to decrease or de-indent. So select the lines that you want indented or as part of the loop and hit the tab key, and that'll push them over. And so let's try this. Let's say, let's set the initial value of side down here. Let's say side equals 20. And now instead of having to click the test run button over and over again, I'm just going to click it once, and that's going to jump into this loop. And as long as that value of side is less than 220, these lines will be run. And so at the end of the first run through, so side is initially 20, and so at the end of the first run through, side is going to be increased by 10, so it'll be 30. So then it's going to jump back up here to the top and check again. So it'll say is 30 less than 220? And as long as that's true, these lines will run again. Let's give it a try. Okay, and let's see what happens if I click test run again. So nothing's happening. Let's check and see why that is. Let's see what side is right now. Right now side is 220, and that's what it was at the end of the run, the previous run, when it created this square spiral. So that's kind of a little bit of a pitfall here. So what we're going to do is, instead of setting the value of side down here in the console, let's go ahead and put it at the beginning of this code. So let's set initial value side equals 20. And so now what's going to happen is when you click the test run button, this first line is going to run, and it's going to set the initial value of side 20. And then it'll go into this loop, and it'll check, is the value of side still less than 220? As long as that's true, these lines will run. It's going to keep incrementing or increasing side and looping through until side is no longer less than 220. It's equal or greater than 220, and then it'll stop. Now, if there were any additional lines, then those would start running after. Let's say you wanted to go forward 100 afterwards. Now notice that this line is not indented, right? So that's how it knows what's part of the loop and what's not. If this line were indented, even though there's a space here, it doesn't matter space this way. I could push this down 20 lines. As long as this indent value, this amount of indent hasn't changed, this would still be part of the loop. But if I de-indent it, that's how Python knows that the loop has ended, and then so these lines are part of the loop, and then this first line that's not indented as part of this while is no longer part of the loop. So let's give this a try. Let's reset and run this. So you can see here's the spiral that was coming out of the loop, and then this last leg is only 100, and that's run by this, which was code that ran after the loop was completed. And now, because we set the initial value here at the beginning, all we need to do is click the test run button, and it'll start again from the beginning, from this initial value. And we can keep just clicking the button over and over again, and it'll keep running this code. So let's say that you've created this code and it's something that you find useful and you want to save it. It's a good idea to give this a name. So let's come up to this first line and we'll create a comment and we'll call this, say, square spiral. And you can notice that the first line is going to show up here in this page dropdown. So for instance, if you had started a new page and you were working on some other code and you realize, oh, I need to create a square spiral, you could just switch back to your square spiral page. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this because it's not really part of the square spiral. And then I could just click the test run button and create a square spiral. And then I could switch over here and I could work on this other code some more, and then if I need another square spiral I could switch back and hit test run and create another square spiral. Remember, if your code starts getting longer, you can always increase your speed and make these things run faster. So if you wanted to create square spirals, you could click on the button and create them pretty much as fast as you can click the button. Before we move on, let's make one additional change. This test here, where we're looking to see if the value of side is less than 220, this 220 is what programmers might sometimes call a magic number. Basically, it's a number that, without reading through the code, it would be kind of hard to tell what it was doing. So instead, let's give it a name. Let's say the longest we want these sides to get is 220, like it is now. And then in the test, we'll replace the value. And so each time through the loop, we're going to check and see if the side is still less than the longest that we want these sides to get. And right now, longest is still going to be 220. So if we run this now, it's going to continue doing exactly like it's been doing. But what this allows you to do is, first of all, it lets you read the code a little bit easier. So instead of just looking and seeing if side is less than 220, which would be kind of hard to tell what it's doing, this lets you see, oh, if the side is still less than the longest that we want this to get. And it also allows you to make your changes. So let's say instead of making square spirals that end at 220, we want to end them at 320. And so that makes it slightly larger. And you can do the same thing with the side here. We could maybe call this start, except that this isn't just the start value, because each time through this is going to change, and this is the value of the side each time through. But we could change our initial value. So let's say we want to start them at 60. So now we have a square spiral that starts a little bit larger and it ends a little bit larger because we've changed this to 320. And in fact, you could do the same thing here with this 10. You could say that this is the increase, and then we'll name this up here. We'll say the increase is 10. And again, this is doing the same thing as it was doing before, but you could change this. And so let's say that the increase is now 2. And so each time through, instead of getting larger by 10, it's going to get larger just by 2. And this makes your code a little bit more general, a little bit more useful, and a little bit easier to read. You might be wondering why we didn't replace this value, this 90, with a variable also. And of course you could do that. You could create a new variable, maybe call it angle, and replace this 90 with the variable angle, and that would allow you to change this up and make things other than squares. We had liked this as a square spiral function, and most people realize that this angle at the corner of a square is 90 degrees. So this 90 is more or less self-explanatory. So you could do that, but it's not really necessary in this particular case. Let's go ahead and create another example before we finish up here. And let's see, we'll reset this canvas so we can see what we're doing. Since we were thinking about making angle variable, let's go ahead and we'll say angle equals 10, and then we'll create a loop. We'll say forward 50, left angle, and then we'll increase angle by 5 each time. And then these 3 lines here are going to be our loop. So we'll say while angle is less than, let's try 90. And let's see what this does. It's kind of interesting. It's creating a little bit of a spiral effect here. And let's see what happens if we just continue clicking test run. So it's kind of interesting. This code that we've written, which has a loop in it, is also a loopable piece of code. Kind of like we were talking about before. We have a piece of code where we can repeatedly run this code and get another interesting result out of it. So it might be nice to be able to run this code without actually having to switch to this page. So we might name this spiral to sort of set it off from our square spiral, which we have also. I mean, we still have that square spiral functionality, and so now we have this spiral functionality. It would be cool if we could run this without having to switch pages in order to get to it. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create functions, and that's what we're going to get into in the next video. So thanks for watching. Give these things a try. Maybe try changing some of these values and see what sort of results you can get, and we'll start working on functions in the next video. Thanks for watching.